Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lurking for Legends. This is the first episode of season 2. So actually, a year ago tomorrow, that season 1 uh, launched with Christy Stratos as a co-host, and David M. Kelly is my co-host today, and he's filling in for Christy. And so every Tuesday at 8 p.m., our live videocast speaks with people from all walks of the publishing industry, from authors to editors to narrators to cover artists. We have special episodes in which we invite readers to tell us about what they like or dislike about the many different genres. That's kind of a fun one we did last September, so hopefully we can bring that in again sometime this year as well. And today, due to a scheduling error today and tonight, I guess I should edit that script. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is editing and all that other good stuff that goes along with the writing process. But science fiction author David Kelly and myself are going to have an informal fireside chat about virtually anything to do with the writing world. As always, Christy Stratos, who unfortunately cannot be with us tonight, Dave and myself invite our viewers to chime in with answers of their own or ask us something they would like to know about. So good evening, Dave. I hope you're keeping warm way up there above the Arctic Circle.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you. And yeah, it is very, very cold.
So you can basically
it's
turn
so
your
cold
fridge off.
My garage door froze.
Did you get it? No, you haven't got it.
I haven't got the main door, but my side door froze. I couldn't open it.
Right.
So yeah, that's how cold it is.
Yeah, I bet it's cold up there. So.
And hello, everyone.
So today we just want to talk a little bit about the writing process in general and what writers go through. And if anyone has any questions that you'd like to chime in with, please feel free to ask Dave and I. We are not the definitive source of how things should be done. And Dave and I were just talking about this before we came on air that it's not, there's no manual out there to say this is how to write, this is how you should edit, and this is how you should do anything. It's a general kind of a thing that can get you going, but then you have to find your own path. Each individual writer, like I know Dave and I do things totally different from each other, and so you have to find your own way as an author. And things that work for you might not work for me, and might not work for Dave. But in order to mix it up, and just before we get going, I want to say in order to mix it up a bit this year on Lurking for Legends. And we're talking about Dave. I talked to Dave about this a little bit today too, and we're going to work this out. But the first Tuesday of every month, other than today, obviously, Lurking for Legends guest authors are going to be invited back, and they're going to be doing live reads with us. Christy and I have done these before, and our readers seem to love these things. They love to hear the words read aloud by the people who actually write them. So mark Tuesday, February 1st on your calendar, as that will be the first of what we hope to be many memorable live reads. And I'll try and get David involved in those as well.
Well, we'll see.
So to get us rolling tonight, until we have any questions or anything come in, I thought it'd be interesting if you, Dave, would walk us through the entire process of writing, say, a Joe Ballin book, and obviously to do it in a nutshell. Otherwise, we could be here for weeks. But how do you go from the original concept of the book to whatever planning goes on behind the scenes before you even start the writing, and take us all the way to the time you sign into your beloved Amazon account and hit the publish button? But before we get started, just remember to our viewers, if you wish to ask anything about what Dave says or add in things that you do yourself while writing your own book, please don't be afraid to comment, and I will make sure to have Dave answer your questions as well.
All right. Well, my process has changed a fair bit since I started writing. And I suspect that's the same for most authors. It's a process of change as you kind of like develop your own style and your own kind of like ways of working. But my way of approaching things now is I try to start off with a few key kind of points for the story. So I like to know at least roughly the beginning of the story. I like to know roughly what the end is going to be, unless it changes. And I also like to know a couple of sort of high points in the middle of the book, kind of like these are things that I want to hit. I also kind of like usually plan out I guess you would call it, loosely the theme of the book, what it is I want to kind of like achieve and say with those characters, or with the main character, if it's just a single kind of like main character. And I want to know all of that. So it's kind of like a very loose plan before I actually start writing. Um, I've written completely freeform before. Um, and when I start writing and actually start putting words down, my writing tends to be fairly freeform and very loose. I don't have a full, complete plan, a full, complete plot or anything like that. Um, and so, but I find if I have at least a bare framework of where I want to start, where I want to go, and where I want to end up, that saves me a lot of time in terms of kind of like getting so far into a story and then getting stuck with the writing on what do I do next, sort of thing, which I've had. Um,
So just to interrupt you here, Dave, when you get stuck, I I am not one who believes in writer's block. I believe that we have writer's pauses, in which case the writer's not, or that the story is not ready to be written at this point. But how do you find you get yourself through these difficult sections where you find you don't know how to proceed?
I don't. I don't find I kind of like suffer writer's block as such. It's more kind of just I've got a range of options that I can go with, and sometimes I can't decide which one is the one that I want to kind of like move forward with. Sometimes I get hung up on this for quite some time. And what I actually do with that, um, strangely enough, is like I actually usually switch to writing something else completely different. So I'll start working on another story, and I'll let the problems of the original story kind of like bubble away in the background, and eventually one of them inevitably will kind of like rise to the top, and I go, yeah, that's the one I should go with, and I'll switch back and go with it.
Interesting.
Um, and so I usually have sort of like at least kind of like one or two, sometimes more than that, stories kind of like on the go at once, sort of thing. Hi, Christy. Hi, Hillary. Um, so that's kind of like how I get started. So I've got like a very loose kind of like plan. Um, Once I actually get started writing, it's pretty much just kind of like charge ahead. I try to achieve a word count a day. Um, Although I kind of have weekly targets, but I also kind of divide it up into daily targets. I don't stick strictly to a daily target for word count, because sometimes I can kind of feel more inspired than others, so it kind of wavers up and down a little bit. But I try to hit a certain weekly word count, and that keeps me focused on the writing process.
So do you
Uh,
find you stress over these things if you don't hit them, or is just
no,
it's just a
it's
number
a
that you try to hit, and if you don't hit it, that's
yeah,
okay because that's what you were going to write that week.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's a guide. It's purely a guide. It's like if I don't kind of berate myself if I don't hit my target. If I overwrite my target, I don't kind of fret about that.
you have an extra beer at
It's
that point. Yeah.
it's a guide.
Yeah,
That's all it is. It's just a very rough
for sure.
guide. It's just a mechanism to try and keep me focused on the story at hand, literally. Um, Hi, Louise. Um, so basically, that is how I. So that's how I kind of like approach the first phase of writing. Once I've finished the first draft, I basically then put that away on a shelf for kind of at least a month to basically try and purge that story out of my head. and I will work on something else completely different. Um, what I find that does is it clears my head so that when I come back to trying to edit it, I'm not too close to the story, and so I see it with a much fresher pair of eyes than I would do if I just try to actually jump straight into editing it as soon as I've finished the initial writing. So I then go through. Sorry, I had a note from my business manager. So then I move into the actual editing side of things. I don't like editing. I will be the first to admit it. I find it quite tedious and boring, but I've got used to it. And I realize that it's an opportunity to make the book a lot better than it would be otherwise. And so it's actually a very necessary part of the process. So basically what happens is I go through the script page at a time, reading through it, looking for awkward kind of like sections, looking at the pacing and that kind of stuff. I usually at that point it usually shrinks somewhat. The script usually shrinks. I also have some automatic grammar and spelling software that I use to help remove some of the nasty bits and find things like repetition and so on. Once I do that, once I've done that, it then goes off to my first reader, otherwise known as my delightful wife, who then basically reads it and tells me whether I've done okay or not.
So is it a quiet household after that? Like in separate rooms for a little bit, or?
It depends. There have been times when I've kind of been almost expecting a divorce over something I've written, but it's usually fairly quiet. And my wife basically goes through it, and she does it. She does two passes. The first pass, she just goes through the story as a reader, looking for kind of like how it feels, the pace, the characters, the setting, and so on. And then she goes through it as an editor, where she basically pulls it completely to pieces and gives me a manuscript that looks like an explosion in a red pen factory. So after she's done that, I revise it according to the feedback from her. I don't always kind of like do everything that she tells me. It's I'm the author, so I make the decisions. So I basically go through it like that. After that, I send it to my editor proper, who is a professional editor. She goes through it, looks for kind of like problems and so on. I get the feedback from her. I then will go through the feedback from my second editor, again doing revisions based on the feedback from that. Again, even from my professional editor, I don't necessarily do everything that she suggests. I have a kind of like an idea that if both my wife and my editor tell me something is wrong, it probably is. And after that, I'll do kind of like a couple of extra passes just to kind of like tighten up on, kind of spelling mostly, and that by that point. And at that point, it's then ready to go out. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I also send a copy to my brother whilst my professional editor has it, he's a big science fiction reader, and so he gives me comments just again as another reader as to whether he thinks the book's okay. And so that's it. After that, which is a long process, it gets published.
Awesome.
And the people still find typos.
Yeah. Well, they're inevitable. Like they're like a cockroach. You just can't get rid of them. But for sure. So Hillary's asking us, "Good evening. Be interested to hear about my editing process and whether I made any changes to that over the last year or so. Not over the last year or so, but I've certainly changed the way I do edit my stories now. And I think I learned this for the first time I went down to Vegas in 2018. One of the writers there had been writing since 1974, and he's been professionally published, and he's been hybrid published, and he's been independently published. And so he gave a lecture down there, and what he said, I kind of took to heart, is that write it good, or write it well, write it once, edit once, and move on. And he said what he does is he edits what he writes the next day, and then he'll edit it again at the end. And I've adapted that process, and it's working very well for me. And so again, like no author follows the same path, like we mentioned at the beginning of the show. So if I wrote 1,600 and some odd words today, tomorrow morning I'm going to edit 1,600 and some odd words. And a lot of times that helps put me into the spirit of the story again. And so I can pick up where I left off with the same frame of mind. And once I'm done editing, I do not put it away. I mean, sorry, not once I'm done writing the book, I do not put it away. I immediately start editing it. So I'll start reading it all over again. And it's amazing what I find, because the very first few chapters, I haven't seen them for a few months. And I imagine some writers haven't seen those first few chapters for a couple of years, depending on how quickly you write.
Yeah.
So it's amazing what you forget. At least I do. I don't know if it's an age thing or whatever, but there's there's things I go, oh my god, I remember. And then all of a sudden, right away, I know that what I've just written in the last month or so needs to be altered a wee bit to accommodate what I wrote in chapters 1 or 2. So the end of the book is very fresh in my mind because I've just written it, and I don't forget what I wrote at the beginning, but a lot of it can be a little, you overlook it a little bit, all these little points, and I find that in my mind anyway that I catch my plot holes that way as opposed to taking a break from it and coming back with fresh eyes. So when I do that, and then I have my significant other, she looks at my story and she goes through it and she does a very good job, and then it goes off to other editors as well. So uh, I guess that's the only change that I've done. I used to just edit it at the end, and I guess I'm live reading now, so that's another way that I've been adjusted. So
Yeah.
Hillary is right. I have changed a little bit in the last year and a half. So whatever I write this week, I will live read next week, and that makes a big difference too to the story itself when you actually read it out loud. I I don't know. I'm just one who cannot see myself sitting in an empty room by myself talking out loud. I don't know why that seems strange to me, but I can do it if I have Facebook goings and doing it live. So that works for me. And I guess one other way that I edit is I will print it off. One of my last run throughs, I will actually print it off on my printer, and we go through a ream of paper and a ton of ink. But I find it's very worth it because you would. It's so bizarre when you're looking at the screen and then you're looking at it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, you
It
see it
reads
really
differently.
differently. Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah.
times I will make the edits on the paper thinking, oh God, I can't believe I wrote it like that. And then when I go back on the screen to transfer those edits over, I'm looking back on the screen and no, that was right the first time. So it's funny how the two mediums really change your perspective. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like my wife, when she reads it, we always print it out for her because she is much happier sitting there and reading it on paper,
mhm.
like curled up on the couch, rather than reading on the screen. It's like she spots far more when she's reading it on paper than she does when she's reading on the screen.
Yeah, for sure. Louise says that's what she does too. Edit the next day, edit the whole thing at the end. Yeah. So it's funny how everybody approaches things, and it's just like plotters and planners. And you're a science fiction writer, and I know Christy, she does a lot of Victoriana stuff. So both of you have to do a lot of research, whereas I'm a fantasy writer. I do have to do research to make things realistic. As far as someone falls 40 feet, will they die? Of course they will. I try to not to make it like the remake of the Hobbit films, where a dwarf will fall like 500 feet onto a train set of train tracks, and he just bounces up and he's got his axe in his hand. There are certain things that defy plausibility, and that's one of them. Like, you know, a man is a man, and he can only take so much. You know, yeah, unless there's some other kind of supernatural forces going on. But so, other than the research itself, I suspect you hit the editing stage, but the editing process. Do you edit during your initial writing, like myself, or do you not do that at all?
Um, I sometimes do little edits, kind of like it. I mean, I like you. I mean, I tend to look back at what I've done previously quite often to just kind of like get my brain back into gear. Although one trick I actually use for that is I quite often just finish in the middle of halfway through a sentence. So then when I come back, I just kind of like read that sentence, and it's like, oh yeah, I need to start, finish that sentence.
Hmm.
And by finishing just the sentence, that kind of like takes me back into it. But I do read back what I've previously written, and although I don't kind of like include it as an official step, as it were, kind of the way you do, it's like I will as I'm reading back. If I spot something that's kind of like not so good, it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of like a bit, you know, crappy. I'll just
Hmm.
massage that a little bit, sort of thing. So I do actually read it back in that sense, but just not as a kind of a specific kind of formal step in my process. Uh, when I'm writing and I get in the flow, as I call it, um, it's like I write so quickly, like that I don't want to kind of switch my brain off to start analyzing things, because if I do, I'll lose the moment and I'll kind of, kind of like, it's like having a kettle on the boil. It's like if you turn the gas off, it's like it's going to stop boiling, and it's like,
Hmm.
and my brain seems to need that kind of activity level to kind of like keep me going and keep me in the zone, sort of thing. Um, so I don't kind of typically kind of like do it as a specific step, but I will read back, and if I spot something, I'll change it.
That's awesome. We have Michael Josh down here now. I have him as he's one of my Facebook friends, and he is also an author. I'm not sure if you've been on with us before, Michael, but welcome. And he's saying that Dickens did readings and over time edited his stories, like A Christmas Carol, for example. And
Hmm.
I find that readings really help. And like I say, I don't know why, but I feel strange if I'm in a room by myself just reading out loud. I don't know why that makes me feel strange, but it does. But I can just turn on Facebook, and then even if I don't have an audience, most of the time it's just me reading to a computer screen, but I'm live somewhere. If someone wants to tune in, I feel totally fine doing that. It's almost
You're
like
an
I have a
author,
physical
Richard.
audience.
Of course, you're weird.
Yeah, I guess it goes to the territory, doesn't it? Now, you had mentioned before we went on there that you had some points you wanted to bring up, so I will stop
It's just
monopolizing our show
just a
tonight.
no, it's just a few things that I said I just kind of like thought we could talk about. I mean, obviously, I mean, I write almost entirely sci-fi, um, and you're a big fantasy author, and I was just kind of like, it was just something that I kind of makes me wonder sometimes. Do you actually, because you always see these books jammed together in every bookstore, um, every book listing, it's sci-fi and fantasy. And so I was like wondering, do you actually see kind of like much of a crossover between the fans, or do you think they're kind of like more separate than most people think? I tend to think that they're more separate, but I was just wondering what your opinion was.
Me personally, I like either genre, and I think the two genres kind of complement each other. And I think there's a lot of science fiction stories like Star Wars, that you and I always have this fun debate over, that isn't really science fiction. It's more of a fantasy than anything. You know,
Hmm.
with your Jedi's and everything else, there's really no science fiction with the light. Maybe the lightsaber is science fiction if someone can figure out how to make a laser beam stop, 3 feet away, but a lot of that is fantasy. So I think it's inherent in a lot of science fiction that fantasy plays an aspect in it, because there's people and races that we've never, obviously we've never discovered any races before other than human. And so if you go out beyond the stars and you come across another race, the writer's got the prerogative to make that race do anything they want, and I think that's where science fiction crosses the boundary into fantasy. So I think the two kind of go hand in hand, unless you're really a hardcore science fiction reader. I think you enjoy some fantasy. You might not, as a science fiction reader. I know you love dragons as far as figurines. I've been to your house and you've got a nice display of them. I'm gonna have to steal a few and put in my library. But as a science fiction author, you might not like reading about dragons and elves and stuff like that. But I think there's a crossover, and I do like to reading the odd science fiction just to take a break from reading fantasy all the time. As much as I love fantasy, I think it opens the horizons in my mind as far as writing my stories by reading different genres as well. But I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, I tend to think of them as perhaps more different than that. I think there is some crossover, or there can be, but I think to me, science fiction is very different from fantasy because, like, science fiction, to me at least, this is just kind of like my idea, but like to me, fantasy, literally anything can happen.
Mhm. Yes.
Whereas, like in science fiction, if you're writing what I tend to think of as science fiction, that's not the case. Not, you can't just suddenly kind of like have, I don't know, sort of Puff the Magic Dragon appear out of nowhere, sort of thing.
Oh, come on, why not?
Um, it's like because it defies the laws of physics.
So that's speaking purely from a science fiction aspect that all the people are coming from Earth, and we're all. So I can see how you can't really vary from that point. Otherwise, it's not realistic, for sure.
But even if Puff the Magic Dragon is an alien, they still can't break the laws of physics, sort of thing.
Right,
It's
right,
like,
yeah,
as Scotty would say, sort
yes.
of thing. I kind of break the laws of physics, Captain. You know, um,
Come on, he brought those whales in there.
and I mean, I don't always write that kind of hardcore sort of science fiction sort of thing. Um, I mean, well, my Hyperion book is completely not hard science fiction at all. It's complete kind of like made up, nonsense kind of thing, But it's just meant to be fun. But I don't know. It's just something that kind of, I don't know. Sometimes it bothers me a little bit that they kind of like get jammed together
Right.
so much,
I agree. Pure science fiction, you can't, like you say, break the laws of physics. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense, and you're going to have a lot of readers that will call you out on that for sure. They
Hmm.
won't enjoy the story at that point. So Christy's asked us, and this will apply to you as well. Do you build your story around a world you've already mapped out, or do you map the world as you go?
You want to answer that first, Richard?
I
Or
can
do you
do,
want me
sure.
to? I
I
don't mind.
uh, I generally start without the map, and I kick the character out the front door. I've said this many times before that I discover the world as I go through their eyes, and I guess I'm no longer a full blown pantser because I've got a lot of like tons and tons of Excel spreadsheets with
Hmm.
different places and people and all that. So I kind of know where a lot of my stories are going now. But even so, when I'm writing the book that I'm writing now, I don't know the filling scene. So I know how it's going to start. Like you say, I start at a certain place and I know where it's going to end, and I know certain points that I want to hit, but it's getting the characters to those points that I want to hit that I have no idea what's filling it in there. So I don't have all these sticky notes behind me saying this is what
Hmm.
you're going to do next. So at that point, I kick the character out the door. We'd explore the world together. We discover new castles and mountains and all that other stuff to go with the world building in fantasy, especially. But at some point, I have to learn the the timelines as far as how long does it take a dragon to fly from this place to that place because it's got to be consistent. So this is where the reality starts coming into the fantasy where you know the dragon can't go from here and fly 1,000 miles in 5 seconds unless there's something else involved. But
Hmm.
so if I know it takes 10 days to go from Grishin to Highcliffe, it's always got to take 10 days, give or take, if he
Yeah.
flies a little faster. But So I'll start writing all these down. At that point, I will start making the map, and then that way I've got good reference points from High Cliff to Grishin in the Kingdoms of Man to the Kradic Empire way in the north, down to Sarson's Rest, the home of the dwarfs, which is the map that I'm building right now. So I really enjoy the process of building maps. As far as a science fiction author, you would have a much bigger map than I would because you have planets and universes and everything else involved. So, or galaxies, I guess. Not
Yeah.
universes.
Well, when back way before I started writing the first Joe Ballon book, I actually came up with an idea for a whole kind of sort of future history development um, involving kind of like humanity moving out into the stars and kind of finally meeting other species and this kind of stuff. And I kind of like planned all of this out, very, very broadly speaking. Um, and so I now have this kind of idea of like how things are going to progress into the future. And the stories that I'm writing, certainly the Joe Ballon stories and the Logan Two Feathers stories, they're basically set in this universe at slightly different times, and the ones that I'll be writing in the future will move forward as I go, sort of thing, into this world. So they're kind of set in this universe, although they're not planned in detail. They kind of exist within this more, kind of like widespread universe. But I do have similar problems also on a technical level because I need to know how long for instance, it takes for a spaceship to get from one planet to another, or so on and so forth. And so I actually have 3D star mapping software with kind of like all the stars in it, and then I use that to kind of like decide how people can get to where they are. So the Joe Ballon and the Logan Two Feathers books, they're both actually based on real astronomical data for existing stars. And then I kind of set my stories inside them, sort of thing. And I also, it becomes kind of like more difficult because not only do I have the problem of like where stars are and that kind of stuff, but it's also kind of like the physics of literally flying a spaceship from one place to another. So I actually have to do things like calculate orbit transition times. It's like if they're going, sort of like 10 million kilometers, how long does it take for them to accelerate and then slow down to get there? Sort of thing. It's like,
that's why I write fantasy.
Yeah, it gets pretty involved, as you can imagine, sort of thing.
Oh, I can imagine, yeah. I can.
But it's kind of good fun. But it's like, I mean, the thing is I mean, sometimes, I mean, I kind of get bogged down on this, and I'll spend ages working out these details, but then to keep it sort of like, so I'm not, kind of boring the reader senseless, that might equate to only kind of like, one or two words. And it's like, it might just
have to know though as a writer.
5 days later we were at Mars or whatever, kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, I need to know that, but for the reader, they don't necessarily need to know that.
For sure.
Why of that. They just need to know, okay, 5 days later. But I need to know it so that, like, if somebody, kind of like questions it, I can say, yeah, well, this is why.
I think most of us agree with Wanda. She says that's so much like work. So I can imagine you must go down some kind of rabbit holes, and Hillary probably has a hard time digging you out of them when you get in there. It's
sometimes. I mean, I try to keep it simple, but still accurate, if you see what I mean. But sometimes I do have a tendency to try and put too much in, and Hill usually lets me know if I do that. It's like
yeah, that's where the editing comes in. Yeah. So that being said, obviously you've done a lot of research on these things. How do you keep track of, like I say, I do mine on Excel spreadsheets. That's all I do is, and I've got a couple. I've got for one for places, and it has different things in there, and I've got one for people, and a lot of times I'll have the monarchy and the family trees of the especially of the royal houses and stuff like that that I can refer
Mm.
back to. So what do you do to log all these things in? What kind of programs do you use, or is it a
Well,
sticky note?
as I say, I have some 3D star mapping software which I use to keep all the sort of astronomical details and so
So it will
on.
track, like it'll keep that in its memory what you've researched.
Yeah, you can kind of, it keeps all the different stars in where they are relative to each other, how far apart they are. You can add your own notes and that kind of stuff, so
Okay,
that you can
you can
say
add your
like
notes
this
in.
was discovered in certain time by Bob Smith kind of thing. And then in terms of characters, specific places and things like dictionaries, equipment, spaceships, that kind of stuff. I actually create a Scrivener file to go along with the
Okay,
series.
Scrivener.
So I've got a Scrivener file called Joe's World, and that basically has all the details for all of the characters that have ever appeared in the Joe Ballon books. It's got all of the kind of like terminology, all of the places, all of the spaceships, etc., etc. And so it becomes like a big kind of encyclopedia of Joe Ballon, so to speak. And you've got some pretty good search functions in Scrivener. So it's kind of, a very handy way of keeping it. The only problem is with Joe Ballon is it's got so big, it's actually getting slow to open and close now.
All of a sudden, Scrivener, you need a Scrivener for a Scrivener.
Yeah.
So Louise is wanting, and you might have answered a little bit of this, but maybe not at all. What specifically is your star mapping software? So,
Oh, it's called Astrosynthesis, Louise.
and that's something. Is it a free app online or?
It's not free, but it's not too expensive. I'll put the name in.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, don't ask me to do it.
Um, and
So just for everyone's note, since it's on my Facebook feed, I didn't type that. David did. It just comes up with my name.
um, and it's kind of a bit of an old clunky program. Um, it and it's a little bit unreliable, but for the job it does, it's the best thing I've found so far to do that kind of job. Um, I keep wishing that they'd do some updates, but they never do.
I was just going to ask you that. Do they update it? Because I know they're always
They
coming up with.
do it, but it's very, very slow. Is the update cycle on that? But it's relatively cheap, and I say in terms of like for doing actual star mapping that helps you as an author keep things in your head, that's about the best kind of like thing I've found, and I've looked for years trying to find something.
And Louisa says she's also a fan of Scrivener. She started using it this summer. She loves it. So I'm kind of like I'm going to refer back to Wanda there. When I'm one of those old school people that maybe not old school, but I don't like learning new programs. So I do everything in Word. So you write in what program do you write in?
Um, it kind of depends what I'm doing. I tend to write most of my stuff in Scrivener, uh, but I've actually kind of like realized kind of in the last few years that it doesn't really matter what software you're using, quite honestly. And so quite often, I mean, if I'm kind of like out and about and I've got some spare time, or like, I just don't want to sit at my computer and whatever, I'll actually just write on my phone with a very simple kind of like text editor that's kind of like closer to like the little Windows, kind of like WordPad sort of thing. It doesn't have any kind of like fancy features or anything like that. Um, but that's actually can be quite good because like it forces you to focus on the text, and so I actually find that sometimes quite useful just from that point of view. Um, and then basically what I do is when I kind of like I'm next on my computer, I just kind of like plug in my phone, grab the text off it, drop it into Scrivener, and there you go. I'm kind of like I'm starting again, sort of thing.
And Christy's saying that there's a level of organization Scrivener provides that I can't work well without for anything longer than a short story.
Yeah, it's very good for organizing novels. If you're writing short stories or even perhaps shorter novels, you might not find it as useful. But certainly, if you're writing, full-length novels, and especially, I mean, for something like the mighty tomes that you write, Richard, it's like, I mean, I would have said it was invaluable. I know you don't use it, but it's like it really is very, very useful for organizing things and keeping things, tracked in your head, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm a pretty linear writer, so I know some people write different chapters even though they don't
Mm.
appear in the book chronologically in chapter order, whereas I'm a linear writer, whereas I write chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. I don't deviate from that. There is the odd time that I'll think, oh, I need to add this somewhere else, or the timelines of different story arcs aren't melding uh, to come to a conclusion together, so I need to move them around. But you can do that very easily in Word as well. You just
Mm.
grab and drag. So I don't have any issues with the way I write, but I can see the benefit for other things. You mentioned when you were editing that you use different programs to do spell checks and stuff like that. What are they?
Mm. Uh, the main one I use is a piece of software called Smart Edit, which basically is a plugin for Microsoft Word, and it does all kinds of. It does basic spelling checks, but it also does kind of grammar checks. Um,
Now, is there a cost to
it,
this?
yeah, I mean it's not free again, but again it's not sort of like that much
Right. Just a
money. I think
one time shot.
it's a one-time payment, and I think it's maybe about $40, something like that.
Hmm. And do they give
Uh,
you updates and that? And not that you need a lot of updates, but I know the English language does evolve a little bit every year.
it does get updated. Again, it's not that frequent because I mean, like you said, I mean things don't evolve that quickly.
Hmm.
But you do get updates, and so far I haven't had to pay for one, and I've had it for gosh years. So I mean they're pretty good on that aspect. Um, and it does things like it'll catch double words. If you can like have, sometimes you get like it
Hmm.
or the, it'll catch things like that. You can set like your own list of kind of crutch words. So if there are words that you can like tend to over rely on, you can like build a list and then it will highlight all of those and say, oh yeah, you've got far too many thises or
Hmm.
far too many, you know, I don't know,
All right.
witches or
So,
something.
so I have to ask, what's the word you use the most? What's the word that it highlights for you the most?
Um, I probably can't say because it's a swear word.
Bollocks.
No, probably. Well, there's a few actually which are all about the same kind of level,
Yeah.
um, but probably, probably actually,
Oh yeah. And
probably and
now,
maybe.
are you catching yourself now as you're writing it and changing,
Yeah,
or you just go with the flow and then edit it out later?
I do tend to catch it more now because I've become kind of like more
Yeah,
aware of
yeah.
it. But there's kind of like words like that, probably, maybe, um, and so on, that I tend to overuse. So this is just kind of like an added check. Um, it also finds things like adjectives, and so you can like
Right.
look for the overuse of adjectives and so on, and that can help guide you into writing something that's more, that's stronger and more powerful.
A little tighter, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Louise is saying
Um,
she used Word until recently and it worked fine, but it's a lot clunkier going back and forth between chapters. So Yeah.
I'll
I,
just put
I
the name in there for anybody who's interested.
Smart edit. Yeah. Yeah. I might have to look into that as well. But
Uh, it's
it,
it's really quite useful. I used to use it later in the process, um, as kind of like a last minute check, but
mhm.
more recently I've actually started doing it on my first edit, um, because what I've found is that, doing it on my first edit, so before Hillary gets to see it, means that she has so much less work to
Right. Oh,
do.
for sure. Yeah.
And so she then can focus in on the stuff
Mhm.
that's actually more problematic,
Hopefully she'll
and
catch something else. Yeah.
that lifts the kind of like the quality overall a lot higher, sort of
Mhm.
thing. Um, so yeah, that's one kind of like one I tend to use the most. There's a couple of others that are fairly well known, and I can't think of the names offhand.
I just think of
Grammarly.
Grammarly. Yeah. Exactly.
Grammarly.
Yeah.
I have Grammarly. I
Yeah.
sometimes use, but I tend to, I find it tends to kind of like over report
Yes.
too much, and
Being a fantasy author, I find
yeah,
it. I go through a lot of stuff that I don't need to go through just because it doesn't like what I'm writing, but what I'm writing is right.
yes, same with science fiction,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah. I bet. So
So
just going touching on that, your overuse of the word probably. I find that that's one of the biggest things, biggest benefits of using an editor is they are the ones that generally let you
mm,
know you're overusing this word, give the reader credit or tighten the story up. And those things that I've learned with our, like we share the same editor, as I've learned over the years is don't use certain words or don't use certain words very often. And
mm,
as I'm writing now, I still do it. I find I still do. I'll still write it today in my 1,600 words I wrote today. But tomorrow they just jump right out at me when I'm editing, and I go, "Oh yeah, take that word out of there," and it tightens everything up, and
yeah,
I truly see the benefits. So uh, when people talk to me about wanting to write a book, I always tell them, pay for a good editor and
yeah.
have a good
Christy's
cover. Yeah.
absolutely right. Editors are allergic to word overuse.
Exactly. Yes, and as sometimes we try to be a little too flowery with what we write as authors, just to try and
Mm.
write the most awesome sentence that we're going to win the Pulitzer Prize with. So anyway, it looks like we're well past our 40 minutes or 45 minutes that we generally go on. So is there anything else you want to say before we sign off today, Dave?
No, I think that we've covered a lot, and I think it's kind of nice to hear different things, and we've had some nice questions, so I'm good.
Oh, definitely. We could talk about this for hours, for
Yeah,
sure, especially with
and
different
we
authors,
do.
because no, no doubt. When we get together, we talk about it all the time. So, uh, what's new? Is there anything new in the Joe Bell and Dave Kelly universe?
Um, the well, my first reader stroke editor has almost finished the the edit of Logan Book 2. So once that's complete and my edits responding to that, it will be going to my professional editor. So we're getting closer. Hopefully, within the next month, maybe two, we should have a release. So that's good. Other
Awesome.
than that, I'm just carrying on writing Logan 3 and Hyperia 2.
Yeah, that'll
Yeah.
be fun. Yeah, for sure. I know you enjoy writing that. It's a nice break for you.
It's good because Hyperia, there's no planning whatsoever. It's almost like a stream of consciousness.
It's almost
And
like you're writing fantasy.
it is almost like I'm writing fantasy.
Why do you think I write it? I don't even have to be awake to do it. So anyway, in the Soulforge universe, my significant other, my wonderful person who looks after everything other than my writing, like me actually writing the story, CJ Caroline, she's revamped my website and it looks awesome. I now have some
It
flying
does, yeah, very
dragons
good.
with fire breathing. I saw a professional feed on well, no, it was a professional, but on Facebook, their ads, and this guy is uh, announcing how he can do websites for you. And then I went and checked him out a little bit because I was looking for something better than what I had. And he had this dragon that scrolled through the words and everything else. I was like, wow, that is so cool. I got to have that. So then I inquired, and it started at a certain price that was probably beyond my budget. But for me to get what I wanted, it would be a lot more beyond my budget. So I just let it die. And then lo and behold, Caroline's got these Fight of the Breathing Dragons on my website. So if you haven't seen my website, check it out. www.richardhstevens with a PH.com, and you'll see that. I'll actually put it in the comments after, but it's totally cool. And now we have a list. She just made a list today of she's called it the listening list, I think. And it's listing all of our audiobooks, and they have the 5-minute sample chapters on there. So if you like audiobooks, they're on there as well. So that's basically what's new. I'm 60,000 words into book 3 in the Highcliffe Guardians, and it's going fairly well. Since we've got through the Christmas madness, I'm starting to get back on track again. I kind of lost it a little bit in December, and then my fence blew down, and that killed me too in December. But anyway, looking forward to next week. Like I say, beginning of February 1st, like I said, we're going to be doing live reads with different authors that we've had on the show before. So that'll be I'm looking forward to doing that. But next week's guest will be USA Today bestselling author Ann Charles, and writes spicy stories full of mystery, comedy, adventure, suspense, romance, and supernatural mayhem. So that sounds pretty interesting. So when not dabbling in fiction, she claims to arm wrestle her 2 children. She attempts to seduce her husband and argues with her sassy cat. So just from the write-up that she sent us, it sounds like it might be a very interesting show. So yeah, you better prepare yourself for that, Dave. And we'll see everybody next week. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
She's fantastic. Oh, sorry, I'm just reading something from Christy here. Says she's fantastic. I'm assuming she's talking about Caroline, and yes, she is. So until next week, until we meet again, take good care. Good night.
Good night.